shoes that hold a promise. Ed worked in a small shop that smelled like fresh leather and polish. Rain hits the window, and the street looks dark and wet. Ed wipes his hands and looks at the door, waiting for the next bell. The bell rings, and a young woman steps in with careful feet. Her name is Sarah, and her coat is dotted with rain. She holds a pair of old brown shoes. Ed sees deep lines in the leather and thin soles under them. Sarah sets the shoes on the counter and takes a slow breath. "Can you help me keep these shoes going?" she asks. Ed nods, and his face stays calm and kind. He turns the shoes in his hands and studies every seam. Ed points to a crack near the toe and a loose thread by the heel. He says, "They can be fixed, but I need time and care." Sarah looks relieved, but her voice stays soft. She says the shoes were a gift from her mother years ago. She says she wants to wear them for a long time. Sarah tells him she wore them on her first school day. She kept them even when they got wet and stained. Now she wants them to stay with her as she grows up. Ed listens and lets her choose her words. He asks, "Do you want the look to stay the same?" Sarah nods and her eyes look hopeful. She asks Ed to keep the color and the old marks if he can. Ed says he will do his best and writes her name on a small tag. Sarah pays, thanks him, and steps back into the rain. The door closes, and the shop becomes quiet again. Ed places the shoes on his work table under a warm lamp. He presses the leather with his thumb and feels where it is weak. He finds places where the thread is close to snapping. He also finds a thin spot under the left heel. Ed takes a deep breath and decides on a careful plan. He cleans the surface with a soft cloth and mild soap. He avoids rubbing too hard, so the brown color stays true. He sets the shoes near a small fan to dry. While they dry, he checks his tools and sharpens his silver needle. He thinks about how some things are not replaced so easily. The bell rings again, and Ed looks up at the door. A man steps in with a box and a polite smile. His name is Mark, and he delivers supplies to shops on this street. Mark shakes the rain from his hat and stands near the counter. He sets down a fresh bottle of glue and a small bag of nails. Ed thanks him and signs a paper on the counter. Mark looks at the old shoes on the work table. He walks a bit closer, curious but not rude. He says, "Those shoes look tired. New ones are cheaper." Ed keeps his voice steady and says, "Cheap is not the point today." Mark raises his brows and waits because he wants to hear more. Ed lifts the shoes and shows the torn seam inside the tongue. He says, "These shoes carry a gift and a promise." Mark gives a small shrug and says, "Promises do not stop holes." Ed smiles a little and does not argue with heat. He says, "Work can honor a promise. That matters to people." Mark looks at Ed's hands and the neat lines of tools. He seems to understand, even if he still doubts. He says he will come back next week with more supplies. Ed nods, and Mark heads to the door. Before Mark leaves, he adds, "Just do not let her pay too much." Ed answers, "I will be fair." The bell rings as Mark exits, and the street becomes quieter. Ed turns the shop sign to say closed, though the day is not over. Ed carries the shoes to the center of the table. He checks the stitching line by line, looking for hidden breaks. He slides a thin tool under the sole to lift the old glue. The sole peels back in one corner, and Ed stops at once. He knows that one fast pull could tear the leather. He works slowly, and the time goes by in the quiet shop. When the sole is free, he scrapes off the old glue with care. He spreads new glue in a thin, even layer. He waits for it to set, and he watches the clock. As he waits, he fixes the torn seam with his silver needle. He uses strong thread and makes small, tight stitches. He tests each stitch with a gentle tug, then moves on. He patches the thin heel and smooths the edge. He trims stray threads so nothing scratches Sarah's skin. Outside, the rain eases and the daylight gets weaker. Ed keeps working as the sky grows darker. He checks the inside lining and cleans away dust. He does not remove the small scuffs that Sarah asked to keep. He only softens them so they do not spread into cracks. He rubs a little polish into the leather and lets it sink in. He buffs the surface until it is clean and even. Now the shoes look stronger, but Ed is not done yet. He bends the sole and listens for any weak spot. He finds a soft place near the right arch and frowns. If he misses it, the sole may split on a long walk. He opens the seam in a safe place and adds a thin layer under it. He closes the seam again with careful stitches. He presses the sole flat and sets it under a weight to hold. Night comes, and the street lamps glow outside the window. The shop is still, and only Ed's lamp lights the table. Ed works until the stars are bright in the sky. He cleans the last bits of dust from the seams and edges. He tightens the eyelets so they will not pull loose. He looks at the shoes again and thinks about Sarah. He knows these shoes are part of a happy story for her. He knows the story is about a mother and her child growing together. Ed feels a quiet duty and he keeps his hands steady. Then he places the shoes in a plain box and locks the shop. The next day the air is clear and the sidewalk is bright. Ed opens the shop and sets the box near the counter. He checks the clock and wonders if Sarah will come early. The bell rings and Sarah steps in, less tense than yesterday. She looks at Ed's face first and hopes for good news. Ed brings the box closer and opens it with care. Sarah leans in and holds her breath for a moment. The shoes rest inside, clean, strong, and smooth. The brown color stays even, and the old marks remain visible. Sarah touches the toe and then the heel because she wants to be sure. She sees the seam is firm and the sole is steady. Her shoulders drop and she smiles wide. She says, "They look new, but they still feel like mine." Ed nods and says, "They are yours, they are ready." Sarah thanks him for his long work and his careful hands. Ed tells her how to keep them dry and when to return for checks. Sarah listens, then places the shoes on her feet in the shop. She ties the laces and stands up straight. She takes a few steps across the floor to test them. The shoes hold, and her steps are confident and happy. Sarah looks at Ed and says, "My mother will be glad." Ed answers, "I think so too." Sarah leaves the shop with calm joy and a steady walk. Ed watches the door close and feels the room grow quiet again. He returns to his table, ready for the next customer who walks in.